Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leadership and Change. You know, the phrase leadership and change is really a bit of a redundancy because, in fact, leadership is all about generating change. And as I say here in this particular graphic, it's about generating intentional change. There is change occurring around us all the time. It's one of the standards we operate by. There's always change, but not always the change we want, and not always the change that we're responsible for. But with leadership, our responsibilities are to generate the kind of change, the kind of new realities that we want, based on the ones that we would otherwise experience or are experiencing. And key to generating intentional change is to have a vision, or to be able to see a tomorrow that is different than the one from today, to have the capacity to take competent action to bring it about, and to very much include others, because without others and without the relationship with others, we can't bring about the kinds of intentional change that we seek to bring about. And of course, our context for this is the business organization in which each one of us work. We're in a business program. This is a MBA course. So our efforts are in that vein. Now, this model that you see, these 3I ring model in the middle of this, is what I have discovered to be, as I'll say more later, as I define what this model is and how it serves us in this course, where intentional change efforts begins with a imagination, with the initiative, the spark of action, and with the influencing of others. And that 3I ring model, which I'll name later for you, coincides perfectly well with the broader idea of vision, action, and relation as the central components of any kind of generation of intentional change. A little bit about me. In the bottom left-hand corner, I've always been fascinated with leadership ever since I was young, and projected myself, if you will, into situations where I could lead, and had the good opportunity to be a recipient of great developmental, educational, and work experiences. And as we continue clockwise, the great opportunity to practice leadership, to actually experience what that's like in many different forums and task areas of commercial enterprise. I've fundamentally managed every single function within a commercial enterprise, and so I have a good broad experience that was presented to me more than I was looking for it. So in some respects, it's a matter of good fortune. But in my post-actual leadership practice role in the past 3 years, I've gone into the study of leadership, reflecting on the experiences I've had, trying to continue to learn from that, plus add to that learning by studying what others have written, said, and done about leadership. So I've developed a bit of a philosophy. And where I hope that philosophy serves is in this new phase of my existence, my career, where my fascination with leadership continues, but my approach to it is now much more of one of educator and coach, and projecting you into leadership situations in the future that you find attractive to you and to assist you on your journey. My background includes a lot of things. I don't mention the particular company titles here, though they're not secret. I was CEO of a middle market, broad international industrial group, and up until the end of 2012. And since that time, I've been involved with a host of things that you see graphically presented in front of you on this graphic here, from business coaching, individual coaching, part of a national network of ex-CEOs, teaching at various institutions, including this one, writing at length on LinkedIn in a Leadership 15 series that I had done from a previous course of this sort, and a mosaic of activities in the coaching, teaching, and leading others in the process of becoming leaders. And from that practice, that study, and that coaching, I've developed this model that I referred to briefly before, and I refer to it as the coherent leader model. And it serves as a framework for us to apply all the various readings and new learnings we'll uncover in this course as we develop your individual leadership capacity. Now, as I show in this graphic here, each and every one of us is buffeted about by circumstance and our existence and things that go well, things that don't go well, things that we pursue, things that others have for purposes for us, some of which are welcome, some of which are not. And that's a normal function of life. But here you are in this leadership development course. And so what I'd like to ask you, and I'll post a separate area on Blackboard for this, in this first class, before we really get underway in making new distinctions and learning new skills, is to understand what is your expectations. You come into this thing with your life experience to this point in time, your story, if you will, your narrative, and what does it suggest to you at this particular point in time that you'd like to get out of this course? Please share that with me and with the others in the group in the area that you'll see identified. You may want to do that now and come back to this, pause this video, and come back to it once you've completed this first task. Well, welcome back to the class. And at this point, I'd like to just bring you up to date with what I'm referring to here as the current state of the science of leadership. And it's a pretty fragmented mosaic, again, in that I suppose it's kind of like where Einstein was never satisfied in his pursuit of this unified field theory, that all the basic theories of the physical world and how the universe operates could be aligned and create a fabric that made sense. I suppose the same thing is sought in the area of leadership, but its complexities are so great that perhaps the fragmented and somewhat chaotic current circumstance, as you see from these various quotes, is a normal function of something as complex as people operating with other people, trying to get them to do what really is, I think, one of the hardest things any person can do, is imagine a future reality, take competent action to try to bring it about, and convince enough other people to believe in that same future truth that they join you in that pursuit. And you'll see in this third quotation here at the bottom, and I've put a red star next to it because it is one of the readings for this class by Warren Bennis, who is really was one of the most foremost gurus on the subject of leadership in our time, is that it's almost a cliche of the leadership literature that a single definition of leadership is lacking. But we will try in this context to apply one that works best for you so that we develop you to the utmost of your interest and capacity. It won't surprise that very much a psychological phenomenon, if we've described leadership effectively and what it means to any one person to try to bring it about, is that the psychologists have a heavy hand here, even the psychiatrists. And they represent some of our key readings, some of these fellows who have written in the Harvard Business Review and beyond, whose names are well recognized, although you may not know them as well yet. Abraham Zalesnik on the far left, who's no longer with us, writes one of the important articles in the second week's class on managers versus leaders and how they're different. Ronald Heifetz in the middle provides several readings for us in this course. And the fellow on the far right, Katz de Vries, Manfred Katz de Vries, doesn't have an article in this particular reading, but there are some supplemental ones I can direct you to. The psychiatrists are very much involved in the pursuit of understanding what leadership is and how we can make it work. Philosophy has a heavy hand here as well. I refer to it as its many indirect influences, only because philosophy as itself doesn't take on leadership as a study, but leadership comes out of the fabric of many key philosophies, and I've graphically represented 4 here. On the far left is Martin Heidegger and his ontology, phenomenology studies, which are central. Just next to him to the right is William James, famous from the pragmatist school. Then you see in the bottom right an image, a statue of Marcus Aurelius representing the Stoics. And then the yin-yang graphic there represents the Taoists. And I pull from all 4 of these philosophies and others in the course of understanding leadership and sharing it with you. Now, there are 2 approaches to leadership, and it's increasingly becoming one in which there is a lot of new ground being broken in this area of the ontological or phenomenological one that I referred to Martin Heidegger in the previous slide, and that is to embody the learning, not just simply to cognitively understand the readings as they're presented to us in what we might think of as an epistemological or theoretical, what we can know, what we look at a distance or in the stands, if you will, as opposed to down on the court. And we try to, in this course, involve much more of the down on the court, actionable learning as best we're able to do so. We don't avoid entirely the cognitive learnings. There's still so many readings that we can draw from, but we try to balance that with action-oriented activities in the course. And as I show here, the in the stands type of work will be the readings and the lectures that I provide you. The on the court work, well, you'll see more of that in the forthcoming slides here, but hopefully with that, we embody this new learning. And as this quotation suggests from an old indigenous Papua New Guinea tribe, who wrote that learning is a rumor until it is in the muscle. There's a lot of student instruction leadership that I will be asking of you, and it kind of turns our cognitive embodiment graphic that I had in the previous slide upside down when you think that the retention rate, as we understand it, we take in a little when we read it, we take in a little bit more when we hear it, we store more when we actually see what it is we're being taught. When we see and hear it, it's even stronger. When we engage in discussion where we begin to act in conversation, it solidifies our learning greater. When we actually experience it, much stronger. And when we go on to teach it to someone else, our preparation and readiness for it requires such that our retention rate grows quite strong. So your involvement in the student and leadership element of the course will embody the learning and help you to retain this subject matter for your purposes much longer into your careers. Now, we all look upon leaders in the broader world. They're a constant source of fascination for all of us. And the question here is, who do you perceive to be those noteworthy leaders? Who from the broader spectrum of the broader world, the political world, the entertainment world, the economic world that you're a part of, who do you commonly look upon and admire as having the qualities of a leader? I think it's important to reflect on this and to try to model some of those behaviors that we admire most. But what makes these people who put their pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of us, so effective? What are they effective at doing that gives them these leadership platforms from which to speak and act? How do they generate such circumstances for themselves? Well, let's move down from the broader national and international scope of who we admire as leaders and take our focus down to our work situation, our organization, our career. And for the second assignment, and I'll post a separate place on Blackboard for you, I ask you to focus on those leaders who are within reach, people who you know, who you can actually touch, who you experience day-to-day life and work with, and perhaps very much at the work where you are presently. And focus on them, and in this entry, provide me and all of your peers with what it is that these people are particularly effective at doing and what you'd like to emulate from them. And come back to this videotape once you've completed that exercise. Well, what makes them effective, in fact? Is it that they see, comprehend, and therefore interact with the world differently than the rest of us? Does the world actually occur differently for these people? Do they have a different experience than the rest of us do? Perhaps leadership is not necessarily about what you know or even who you know, but how you see the world, how you interpret that which you experience, and how you transform that into possibilities for yourself or not. And this great quote from a nice Nin author from the world of literature is really one of my all-time favorites. And I believe it is so true, and I've discovered it again and again from the work I do in coaching, is that we see things not as they are, but as we are. Our filters of the world are the great interpreters of what actually is in our frame of experience. And as is written here from a fellow who wrote a very interesting piece in the New Yorker called The Itch, and I'll share more on that with you later. And I should caution here that neuroscience and the reductionists, if you will, are always trying to, without necessarily dumb it down, but to granularize or atomize our experience into what is actually happening, like in the brain stem, for example, and that's the clue to our existence. And I'm very cautious about that. But in this particular instance, and I'll just read this aloud so that we share it together, what Gawande discovered and wrote in his article was that if visual sensations were primarily received rather than constructed by the brain, you'd expect that most of the fibers going to the brain's primary visual cortex would come directly from the retina. But instead, scientists have found that only 20% of these connections do. 80% of them, a great majority, come downward from regions of the brain governing functions like memory. So we can see from a neurolinguistic sense, from a reductionist sense, that a lot of what is affecting our visual perception is drawn from things from the past and the way we have begun to form the world in what we might call a mental model. And this is a very important construct that we'll talk about later in the course. So we arrive at somewhat of a new ontological view. And remember, from a couple of slides previously, I referred to Martin Heidegger down here in the left-hand corner and his ontological studies and phenomenology specifically, is that new observations naturally give rise to new ways of being and new actions. And the way we observe, by either the neurolinguistic evidence or by our own experience, is central to what it is we see in the context within which we may or may not rise to leadership responsibilities. And there's a very important model which we will refer to time and again throughout the course, which is this OAR model, that we observe naturally, we take action based on what it is we observe and interpret, and we generate a certain kind of result. If we're not particularly happy with that result, what people commonly do is they go back and they change the action a little bit, or they tweak it, or they make it stronger or louder, or even just repeat it. And as Chris Agiris in his studies from Harvard Business School on organizational behavior referred to this as first order learning. This doesn't get us very far. We won't actually change the results until we actually change the observer that we are, as you see from the bottom of this graphic. And this is second order learning. If we go back and actually reconsider the way we're looking at the world, we may resolve to find different actions that help us to generate the results that we want out of life. And isn't that what we're all after, is to generate the results that we want? So again, drawing the ontological and the phenomenological reference here, a person's way of being and their actions are correlated. They're like in a dance with the way in which what they're dealing with occurs for them. So you have things that are occurring and we have the way that we're viewing them, and that dance kind of affects one another. It kind of acts as kind of a yin-yang influence. And William James and the pragmatists believed that we all approach everything that we experience in our life with our own purposes. We actually come into the experience of any interaction with anything, person, object, what have you, with a purpose in mind. Sometimes not always consciously, but always present. And every one of the objects and people and things that we interact with have their own purposes. And they approach us with those purposes. And that dynamic of conflicting or at least contending purposes is the stuff from which life comes. And this dyadic relationship, a monad is a singularity and a dyad is kind of a duality or a relationship between two things or objects or persons. And those contending purposes is central to our understanding of leadership, as we will discover more of. You know, if we take a binary view and say that there are two different domains in which we categorize all the things that we see and learn and do, is that there are those things that cannot be changed and there are those things that can. And we are always making a distinction between these domains in our everyday life. These distinctions that we make are assessments, and we're going to talk a lot about speech acts in this course to try to put these things more at our behest as developing leaders. But a major competence in life is the ability to make these distinctions in a grounded way, in a way that strengthens us and our ability to lead or to actively follow. And we witness every day the observer in others and in ourselves, basically the observer and their assessments. And what I hope we will accomplish as one outcome from our study together is that in this reflective action that we pursue, that we will discover that we can move more things to the right, that perhaps the things that we may have foreclosed as being factual and end of story maybe aren't as ended or hard-ended, I guess, as we might perceive, that there's more room for possibilities, that as we alter the observer that we are, and as we uncover more skills and observations in the course of studying leadership and becoming leaders, that we will find more things possible for us and for our world. One of the key ways we're going to do that is by the use of our Leader Development Journal. And I'm going to say more about this in due course, but fundamentally this is one of the key actionable areas of our embodied learning on the court, if you will, in this Leadership and Change course. Let's talk a little bit about leadership sources and mechanisms. I think it's an important backdrop for us, and we will revert to the work of Bruce Avolio and a cohort of his fellow professors from the University of Washington, who have done some landmark work, I believe, on what they're referring to as an integrative model of leadership. Not an integrated, but an integrative, one in which it still opens the possibilities of other theories to be entwined with what we've known to this point in time, perhaps in the pursuit of that unified field theory, if you will. But whether it does or it doesn't accomplish that, it's a very open and receptive approach to new ideas in leadership. And in this research that they have done, what they posit in their integrative theory is that there are at least 5 sources of leadership, as you see in the graphic shown here. And you play a key role in all of those potential sources, because all of those sources are very much possibilities for you at this particular point in time. And in our forthcoming class, we're going to focus in on these roles of follower and leader. And as I referred to previously, this dyadic relationship between follower and leader, this dance that goes on, if you will. And we'll begin to look at definitions, distinctions about managing versus leading. And there are very important distinctions we need to make. And the work of Avolio and his peers further says that these sources then are the soil from which the mechanisms leadership spring, and these mechanisms, or these transmitters, if you will, are a person's traits, their characteristics, the actions that they take or their behaviors, and their thoughts and their emotions, cognition and affect. All of these things are important transmitters of leadership when it surfaces from any one of these places that are in and around where you operate today. Now, the model that I briefly introduced to you, this model of the 3 I's, as you see here, and there's a 4th I I'll reveal to you later, but these action attributes are really the follow-on from the behaviors or actions that Avolio and his peers identified as the transmitters. This is the key transmitter. We see all other things ultimately made manifest through these attributes, these action attributes as I identify them here. What I've posted here, and I'll ask you to go to now, is a YouTube clip. It's about 14 minutes, but it introduces you to Professor Bruce Avolio and an exploration of not just the sources of leadership, but this primarily the follower-leader dyad, which is an important thing for us in our next class. And you can see from the graphics I show in the top right-hand corner there is a yin-yang relationship here that we need to understand, because leading is not a one-way street. It's not a one-way force. Leading cannot occur without active followership, or even passive followership for that matter. But followers have a duty to make leadership create the kind of reality that all want by being active participants and identifying the world that they want and the leaders that they'll select. And so with this context, the organization within which you work, this leader-follower dynamic, what I would ask you to do is view the Bruce Avolio video on the YouTube clip that I've posted here. And for your third assignment for this week's class, drawing from this interview, discuss a key leader-follower relationship you have had at work and describe that. What did you learn from that? What did you take from that for yourself? Did things go well? Did they not go well? Even a bad situation may be worthwhile, as they often are, for what we can learn from them and share with each other, so that we all draw the benefit of learning from each other's leader-follower dyad experience in this class. So come back to this video after you've completed that assignment. And these action attributes in more of the public sphere of how a leader operates has also a set of forces behind it in the less public sphere that I refer to as motivators, beliefs, and the state of the leader. And these things come from what I like to think of graphically as the space between each of the action attributes, that as we move from imagination to initiative, for example, our beliefs are a key force. And as we move from taking action to try to influence others, our state, made up of things like our body, the emotion, language, our story, if you will, are terribly influential. And as we move from influence, between influence and imagination, our motivations, our interest in power, what power means to us, the things we care about, the things that influence what we're pursuing in life that we want, are a very strong presence and need to be well understood for leadership to be developed well. So I come to this point to my objectives. This is a particularly long video for our first class. You will see that in subsequent online classes, the video lecture will be approximately 20 to 30 minutes. But in this first lecture, it's very important to get these ground rules established with you and this basic understanding. And I'll let you just look at these objectives that I have for the class. And I'll post these slides for you to look at later, where you can read these at your leisure. In our class, this is very much a co-supportive arena where we are engaging in each other's trust and commitment to supporting one another as developing leaders. And we need to hold each other accountable for just that. There's a syllabus that is obviously posted on the resources on Blackboard for this course. And it includes at least the first iteration of all the readings, the class objectives as we pursue, plus a lot of other important facts as you would expect for the course. Our online class structure will follow this rigor. There will be an assigned student instruction leader who will take one of the readings, and I'll show on the next slide what the task is for that person. There'll be a video lecture from me, shorter than this week's to be sure, and there will be leadership development journal entry presentations by selected students. And in addition to the selected students who present their entry for all others to react to, the rest of us will also submit our weekly leadership development journal entries as well. Here are some instructions on how I expect the student instruction leader in the online class to conduct the class reading. This will also be available in the uploaded slides.